Support for WABE comes from Capital Good Fund, introducing Georgia Bright Solar Lease Program, a new rooftop solar initiative designed to create pathways to equitable and inclusive solar, sustainability, and monthly savings for Georgians. Learn more at georgiabright.org.
I'm Earlonne Woods.
I'm Nigel Poor. We're the hosts and creators of Ear Hustle from PRX's Radiotopia.
Ear Hustle is a show about life inside prison, but it's not your typical prison podcast.
In this next season, we've got stories about the objects people keep inside their prison cells,
about residents in a women's prison who say they want to stay there,
and the most beautiful prison garden. Earlonne, I will never forget it.
Ear Hustle. Stories about life on the inside, told by those who live it.
Find Ear Hustle wherever you get your podcasts.
The majority leader has moved. The Senate stand adjourned. Sonny Die. Is there objection? Chair hears none. We're adjourned. Sonny Die.
This session of the Georgia General Assembly has come to an end.
In the final hours, lawmakers pushed through bills on election and immigration law.
But controversial measures impacting LGBTQ youth never came up for a vote in the House.
Over the course of 40 days, lawmakers have approved a private school voucher program, expanded the child tax credit, and established basic protections for renters.
But measures to legalize online sports betting and expand Medicaid withered another year.
I'm WABE politics reporter Raul Bally.
I'm politics reporter Sam Greenglass, and this is Dome Scramble from WABE News.
Sam, how tired are you?
I'm not sure how I'm forming thoughts at this point after a couple of hours of sleep. We were at the Capitol quite late last night, or I should say early into the morning. I think I filed my spot sometime around 2:15 a.m. How about you?
I got out on the Capitol around like 3:30, got home by 4. So, and by the way, much love to the whole WABE team that was at the Capitol on sine die. Marlon Hyde, Emily Wu Pearson, Juma Say, Matthew Pearson, and Melissa Fato, and of course, you, Sam.
And I gotta say, it is pretty amazing to see a public radio station have such a significant presence covering the state capitol. You know, in so many states, legislatures go without much coverage. And as we all know, the decisions made under the Gold Dome affect life in the state in so many ways. And, you know, this might be my bias, but I think it's really important and awesome that we have so many reporters who are crawling the grounds of the Capitol covering this stuff.
There are so many stories that would otherwise be left on the table, but we have so many people there, and you're on point. We had a great team there this session, and hoping for a bigger team next year.
All right, let's talk about the tone and tenor of how sine die unfolded. It was a very long slog of a day, and then basically a burst of action on almost all the bills we were watching in just the final hours of the night.
Usually, we're done passing bills at midnight, maybe. Sam, we didn't gavel out to over in the Senate was 12:45, and we were right before 1 a.m. over in the House. It was a long and messy day.
So let's start by ticking through what did pass in the final hours of the legislative session. I'll start with one, and that's SB 189. Lawmakers in the last couple hours shoved a bunch of measures into one bill, which got passage just after midnight. The bill lays out grounds for sustaining mass voter challenges, like a voter casting a ballot in another state or claiming a homestead exemption in another state. Democrats like Representative Syra Draper accused the GOP of bending over backward to appease election deniers and said the bill makes it more likely voter challenges will succeed.
I can't believe that we are justifying sloppy and rushed policy choices by saying we need to bring more confidence to our elections when you know just as well as I do that there's a very vocal minority out there who will never be confident in the process so long as their candidate is not the winner.
Remember, this comes at a time when just a handful of individuals have been filing thousands of voter challenges, mostly in the metro Atlanta counties. These have tripped up voters and overwhelmed election offices, even though most of these challenges have ultimately been tossed. SB 189 also removes the Secretary of State from the state election board, eliminates the use of ballot QR codes to tabulate votes by 2026, and it also allows counties to use hand-marked paper ballots in some local races beginning in 2025. Raul, the one thing, though, that must happen is finishing the budget. It's the legislature's one constitutionally mandated responsibility, and it always shocks me how late lawmakers wait to get that one responsibility done. It got done very, very late last night.
Actually, it feels even later than it has in the past, Sam. We were taking up the budget really in the last couple of hours. Throughout the day, I was told the budget's not done. We're still working on it. Budget's not done. Still working on it. As the House and Senate were trying to settle parts of the budgets they didn't agree on. But here are the big things that people need to know about the 2025 state budget. It's the one that funds state government starting July the 1st. It's $36 billion. It includes a $2,500 pay raise for K through 12 teachers, a 4% raise for state and university employees, or some of the big things. The debates and the presentations of those budgets again highlighted something we have been talking about on every episode, almost every episode, the tensions between the House and the Senate. And during his House presentation, Matt Hatchett, who's the appropriations chair on the House side, he had this to say.
And just so we are clear, this budget does not include funding for teachers to carry guns in schools.
Look, that was a very clear shot across the Capitol at Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who had put this idea out there of giving a stipend for teachers who became armed and were carrying a firearm in the classroom. That proposal was never actually put out there, and it did not end up in the final budget. I do want to mention a last-second addition to the budget. The governor added $48 million to the budget for a House pre-K proposal. And the most important thing in that proposal, there is going to be salary parity for pre-K teachers to match what's happening with K through 12 teachers. That's one of the things that came out of a working group from the House. So something that was added at the last second.
Last night, lawmakers also passed HB 1105, one of the key immigration bills that gained traction after a Venezuelan national who entered the U.S. illegally was charged with the murder of a student on the campus of the University of Georgia. This bill would require local governments to coordinate with federal immigration authorities. It got backing from Republicans, but a lot of pushback from Democrats and immigration rights advocates, as well as some local sheriffs.
And that's one of the things we're going to be watching for, Sam, is going to be the implementation of House Bill 1105 and what happens on the local level with law enforcement. And if they do run into challenges, whether it's manpower challenges, funding challenges, or if they don't follow the letter of the law.
We just talked about some of the measures that did pass in the final hours of sine die, but now I want to discuss a handful of big ticket items that did not make it to the governor's desk last night.
So one of the things I was watching is probably the thing I get the most questions about when I appear on radio. I get the questions online, on social media. What's happening with the legalization of online sports betting? And it did not make it. I think what it comes down to is the votes weren't there. When the Senate passed this legislation, they added a constitutional amendment. That means two things. It has to be approved by voters in a referendum, and it also means it needs a 2/3 majority to pass the House and the Senate, and it just sounds like the votes were not there in the House. Much of that comes down to where folks want new revenues to go, whether it's needs-based higher education scholarships or anti-gambling programs. Now, Sam, two of the most controversial bills to pass the Senate in the final 2 days didn't even get a vote in the House.
Yeah, Raul. HB 1104 was a grab bag of these so-called culture war issues focused on LGBTQ kids and schools. This bill would have restricted transgender girls from girls' sports, blocked trans kids from locker rooms that match their gender identity, prohibited sex ed before 6th grade and allowed parents to receive notifications of every book their child checked out of the library. In the final hours, Senate Republicans also passed HB 1170, a ban on puberty-blocking medication for minors seeking gender-affirming care. That move came after Republicans last year prohibited most gender-affirming treatments for children, but stopped short of banning puberty blockers. Democrat Sonia Halpern pointed out that the bill banning puberty blockers, as originally written, was only to require some public buildings stock opioid reversal medication, but Republicans hijacked it and added a much more controversial measure.
This incredible bill, intended to save lives from drug overdose, has been twisted into crippling legislation that will inevitably lead to an increase in suicide and a mental health crisis for Georgia's youth.
Again, they passed out of the Senate, but they didn't even get a vote in the House, which kind of brings me back to what House Speaker John Burns said after we adjourned early this morning. This is what he said when he opened his conversation with reporters.
The House has continued to deliver on those issues that matter most to the people of our state. Cutting taxes, improving and investing in our education, strengthening our public safety, and improving the quality of life for each and every Georgian. You know, some folks choose politics. The House chooses results.
And Raul, I know you also had a bit of roller coasting with two other bills. They were dead, then they were alive, then they were dead. Take us through your evening on these two measures.
You're right, Sam. You know, I had actually written and produced a whole story about a bill that would have made changes to Georgia's film tax credit being dead. And then suddenly it came back. And so there was a last-second effort to bring back that bill. It passed the House, did not pass the Senate. Look, supporters and critics of the film tax credit believe there needs to be some financial guardrails put on the program, and then things need to be added to get a bigger return on investment of taxpayer dollars and a bigger economic impact in Georgia. For example, using more Georgia workers. And I always want to remind people, the state budget is around $36 billion. This is already costing $1 billion a year. So I expect we're going to see legislation on this again next year. The other piece of legislation that I went on a roller coaster with that did not end up making it deals with how does Georgia handle and specifically compensate those who were wrongly convicted and jailed. And, you know, we always talk about what happens to the legislature affecting people. Two wrongly convicted Georgians, they have been exonerated. Their names are Joey Watkins and Lee Clark. They spent part of their day at the state capitol hoping this legislation would get done. In the end, it didn't. And one of the conversations I had early this morning was with State Representative Scott Holcomb. And I just want you to hear the frustration about not getting this legislation done.
I know that this just happened and my emotions are a little bit raw, but tonight when the Senate rejected it, two of the exonerees were actually in the gallery. And you think about how they must have felt through that. These are people who spent decades of their lives in prison for crimes that they didn't commit. And here we are trying to do just a little something to make their lives better by giving them some compensation, which is the only way that we can try to make their lives better is through compensation. And we couldn't get there.
In Georgia, each proposal to compensate someone for being wrongly convicted and jailed is done as an individual bill in the legislature. And like any bill, they can get caught up in politics, horse trading, or just, the House and Senate not seeing eye to eye with each other, which is what happened here. These things passed out of the House, did not make it through the Senate. Representative Holcomb, his idea is to put this as a whole separate review panel. And again, that did not get through the Senate.
One other measure I'll quickly note did not pass, and that was a compromise that originated in the House that effectively would have placed a 3-year moratorium on the construction of a mine near the Okefenokee Swamp. This measure never came up for a vote in the Senate.
And I want to finish up with what's next. Now it's bill signing time. The governor has 40 days to sign or veto legislation. So that's basically from now until May 7th. We're going to have some high-profile signings, some that are done behind the scenes, all while we're racing to the May 21st party primaries. You've got some lawmakers who are turning their focus to that, specifically fundraising, which they were not allowed to do during the session. After we're done with the primaries, of course, we turn towards November and the race for president.
Let's take a break here. This is Dome Scramble from WABE.
Support comes from the Grady Health Foundation, presenting Move for Grady Saturday, April 27th. When you ride, run, or walk for Grady, you help our entire community thrive. There's a distance for everyone, and all proceeds benefit Grady Health System. More at moveforgrady.com.
At a time when information continues to come at us faster and faster, sometimes you need to hit pause and rewind. NPR's Throughline takes you back in time to the source of the news stories filling your feed. Find NPR's Throughline wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Dome Scramble. I want to zoom out and, Raul, have you think back to January. It seems like a very long time ago.
It was.
Let's play a snippet of Governor Brian Kemp's State of the State address, setting up what his hopes and dreams were for the session and 2024.
Georgia is succeeding because we have charted our own path, rejected the failed policies of Washington, D.C., and worked together to put our citizens first. But I believe the worst thing we could do is call it a day and coast through what is certain to be another contentious election year.
So, Raul, what do you think this year's session demonstrated about Georgia in the year 2024?
Sam, one of the most notable victories for Republicans during this legislative session was getting school vouchers done. And one of the biggest proponents is House Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. And during that same press conference where we heard from House Speaker John Burns, she talked about the wide-ranging victories Republicans got on education.
We made tremendous progress for the first time in 30 years on pre-K so that it's more affordable and accessible and higher quality for all of our youngest students. We made a lot of progress on K through 12, particularly in making sure that we have the highest paid teachers in the Southeast now. I'm proud of that.
And just to remind our audience of what we mean by school vouchers, if a child is in the bottom 25% of performing schools in Georgia, their parents will be able to take $6,500 a year per child to use that towards either private school tuition or homeschooling. And so we're going to watch how this gets implemented. And then eventually down the road, what this means for local schools, what this means for their funding models and their funding formulas. Some of the other important things we should definitely talk about. When you talk to lawmakers away from the microphones, away from politics, and I ask them this question of, hey, what are you getting calls about? It's housing, it's property taxes, it's childcare. Something we saw dealt with legislation on all three issues. On the issue of housing, you saw basic tenant protections get passed in this legislature. Those tenant protections will include a home has to be habitable to live in. Your security deposit, if you're renting a home or apartment, can only be 2 months worth of rent. And also, if you're late on your rent, you have to be given notice and at least 3 days before eviction proceedings can start. On childcare, you've seen an expansion on the child tax credit up to $4,000 per child. And then the increase in the homestead exemption, that's going to help some property owners around the state.
All right, Raul, you just ticked through some priorities that, we heard mentioned in the State of the State. But the legislature also spent a lot of time on these so-called culture war issues, especially as it relates to LGBTQ kids and schools, as well as voting changes, driven by the party's right wing. And what the legislature didn't do is one thing that Democrats hoped might finally happen this session, and that's fully expanding Medicaid. Georgia is one of just 10 10 states that is yet to expand Medicaid. Democrats have been fuming about this, especially after some glimmers of hope that there had been movement towards a deal this session. Here's Representative Michelle Au.
Every single day we spend in the legislature, we see people making the calculation about how to gain and hold on to the majority. It's no mystery that this has had a huge effect on our Republican majority's abandonment of uninsured Georgians, as every decision they make seems to be weighed against its enhancement or detraction from that majority hold on power. But what is the point of having that power if you cannot use it for such a clear and powerful good?
You know, Sam, we did see some Republicans start making small steps towards the idea of Medicaid expansion, and they were even asked about it last night during the Speaker's press conference. Here's State Representative Butch Parrish.
We set up a commission that will be, or a committee, health committee, that will be examining all of these issues. How best to deliver the health care, how best to do it most economically, how best to get it to all the Georgians. I mentioned that the House has been a leader in this for years. We've funded the federally qualified health centers all over this state. We've increased the number of residency programs. We've got a new medical school that's coming in Savannah. And to me, that's expanding health care and coverage for the folks in this state.
And Raul, just to wrap up here, I want to go back to the beginning of session. I had talked to Democrat Michelle Au, and she had, back in January, talked about the hope for some bipartisan compromise on Medicaid expansion, and also on a bill she had been working on, HB 971, which would have provided a small tax credit for taxpayers who sign up for firearm safety classes or purchase safe storage devices. And in the end, that bill did pass the House, but it was never brought up for a vote in the Senate in the final hours. It did not pass. So, all these things, Raul, will set up the dynamics of the 2024 election. When every legislative seat is up, margins are growing smaller every year. And of course, Georgia will be a key presidential swing state.
So that's a lot to look forward to, Sam. That does it for this week and this year for Gold Dome Scramble. But before we go, a couple of programming notes. You may have noticed in Gold Dome Scramble, there were times maybe half our show was not about stuff going on under the Gold Dome, sometimes things at the Fulton County Courthouse and elsewhere. So we're going to take a break for a couple of weeks and then come back April 26th with a brand new name. Drum roll, please. Plugged In, a WABE politics podcast.
That's right. Same host, same sound-rich storytelling that takes you around the state to unpack all things politics, policy, law, and elections. Every Friday, you can find us here in the Political Breakfast feed and also in our own feed as well.
And we're going to have a really big kickoff event because it's one of those things people ask me about. Hey, Raul, when is Politics and Pints Trivia? Well, that's going to be the kickoff event for the podcast. We're going to be at Wildly Brewing on Thursday, April the 25th. You can sign up at wabe.org/events.
Gold Dome Scramble is a production of the WABE politics team. Our producer is Brendan Rivers, and our managing editor is Alex Helmick. We'll be back in your ears on Friday, April 26th. Sine die.
Ever wondered where to find the best dumplings in town? Curious about Atlanta's obsession with lemon pepper? Join us on Savory Stories, a new podcast as we uncover the untold tales behind Atlanta's culinary scene. From the roots of your favorite dishes to the creators that bring them to life, we're diving deep into the heart of the city's food culture. Listen to Savory Stories at wabe.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
WABE.
From WABE Studios, the podcast where they read stories is a new children's storytelling podcast featuring notable Atlantans and performers reading classic and contemporary children's books. Each episode contains a story meant to entertain, inspire, and inform young listeners. No screens required. The podcast where they read stories features adaptations from both chapter books and picture books. Join us at wabe.org/stories podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
WABE.